Mindy Curtis was the most famous person in our high school. Now, she wasn't the most famous person just because she was the head cheerleader and had taken her squad to state where they won. And she wasn't the most famous because she was a cinch to make valedictorian, which she did with the highest GPA ever recorded at that school. She was the most famous because she was the only person in the history of West Chicago Community High School to have failed driver's ed 5 times in a row, leaving a legend of destruction and carnage behind her. It was my first day of driver's ed. I showed up at the car, and Mr. Garrett, the instructor, told me to sit in the back. I'll be watching a more experienced driver. You know who that driver was. It was Mindy Curtis. First, she looked normal. Mr. Garrett told her, pull out, go 2 blocks down to the stop sign, turn left, go to the red light, to the light, turn right. She looked carefully, turned on her turn signals, and I saw Mr. Garrett make a check mark on his clipboard. If you would have made me a bet that a 1962 6-cylinder Plymouth Valiant could lay rubber, I would have bet against it. I would have lost. A patch 30 foot long as she fishtailed out of that parking spot heading down. And I watched that ribbon speedometer go 25, 30, 35. We're at the end of the first block, and she's still accelerating 40, 45, 50. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we're not going to make the stop sign. And at the very last second, she used both feet on that brake pedal and came to a screeching halt, keeping the car in the lane. Remember, no analog brakes back then. And we stopped. And that poor car was just panting. She turned on her left turn signal. Mr. Garrett made a check mark. And she fishtailed around that corner and took off again. 15, 20, 25, 30. This time we had 3 blocks. 40, 45, 50. The car was starting not to gain as fast. I mean, it was a 6-cylinder. 55. And we're coming up to the stoplight, and I'm saying, please be red, please be red, please be red. And it was red, it was red, it was red, it was green. She never slowed down. She turned the car somehow and did a 4-wheel drift out into the intersection, punched it, and took off down the road that way. I don't know how she did it. I was very impressed. Then I heard Mr. Garrett say, Mindy, take the entrance ramp to the freeway. And I wanted to scream no, but I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. And she comes down, flipped on the turn signal, again, another check mark. And we're going down the entrance ramp, and the Plymouth is gaining speed. 55, 60, 65. She's got her turn signal on to go into the traffic. Another check mark. Somehow she made it. And then, in less time than it takes to talk about it, she was in the right lane. She was in the left lane. She was in the middle lane. She was on the left. She was on the right. She was weaving in and out. I mean, NASCAR should have her. Finally, she settled down for the left lane and kept on accelerating 70, getting close to 75 miles an hour. And Mr. Garrett said, Mindy, your exit's right over there. And she said, okay, flipped on her turn signal and just cranked that wheel. The Plymouth went on 2 wheels, cutting in front of a semi-truck driver in the middle lane, who was so surprised he didn't even have time to swear. But he was not as surprised as the police officer in the right-hand lane. I could see his face very clearly as I was plastered up against the window. Headed up the entrance ramp or the exit ramp on two wheels. There's a stoplight at the top, and I'm going, please let it be. And no, it was green. Now, the car didn't really accelerate. We were still doing about 70, and she did another one of her patented four-wheel drift, actually two-wheel drifts. You're still on two wheels there, into the traffic and heading down. And up ahead, less than a block away, was another light. And it was green, and it was yellow, and it was red, and she came to another one of her screeching stops right there. And I didn't know what was going to happen. It just, I could hear the car bubbling over. And then I could hear sirens behind us. A couple seconds later, 3 police cars pulled up behind us. First and only time in my life that I was happy to see a police car with its lights on behind me in a car. And I was in the car in front. I recognized the first officer that got out of the car. He did not look happy. He walked up. Mindy had to crank that window down, and he started yelling, "What do you think you are?" And then he stopped and go, "Mindy? Mindy Curtis, is that you?" She looked up and said, "Oh, hi, Officer Smith. Nice to see you again." Then he crouched down and looked across and said, "Mr. Garrett?" Mr. Garrett waved and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't recognize the car." Mr. Garrett says, "Well, you know, the other 2 cars," and he just kind of pointed over at Mindy. Officer said, "Well, how's she doing?" "Well, she's doing much better." And the officer said, "Yeah, I can see that. She is doing better." "Well, be careful out there." And he turned and walked back to his car, called out to the other officer, said, "It's just Mindy." They got in their cars and they left. Mr. Garrett told Mindy, "Go back to the school and stop right where you left." Screech started off. I was getting kind of used to watching the speedometer go up and down. It's coming screeching to a halt right next to where we had pulled out of. And then Mr. Garrett said something that scared me. He said, "Mindy, I want you to parallel park." And I'm thinking, no. Because normally with a student, when you parallel park, there are cones on either side. There were very solid cars on either side. And I knew even though we left from there, it didn't look big enough to get back in. So I went down on the floorboard, curled up. She got that look of determination on her face I could see in the mirror. She eased the car forward, turned on her turn signals, another check mark, and did the best job of parallel parking I've ever seen anybody do. Put the car into park, turned to Mr. Garrett and said, "Well, Mr. Garrett, I guess I'll see you next time." And Mr. Garrett said, "No, Mindy, you won't." And he was writing something out. He said, "Mindy, you have passed driver's ed. If you take this down to the license bureau," because he was also a registered examiner, "they will give you your license." And that's how Mindy Curtis got her license.